For 22 years, I sat in an office just like your doctor's office, and I told people like you things I now know were incomplete at best and quietly dangerous at worst. I'm Dr. John Marston, a functional and integrative medicine physician, and I walked away from conventional clinical practice not because I stopped caring about patients, but because I finally understood that the system I was operating inside was never designed to protect the most vulnerable hours of your life. It was designed to manage symptoms, to adjust medications, to treat the numbers that appeared on lab results drawn at 10 in the morning under fluorescent lights after you'd already been awake for 4 hours. Numbers that had nothing to do with what was happening inside your cardiovascular system at 6:45 a.m. when your body was doing something your doctor never once discussed with you during any appointment. I followed the guidelines. I prescribed the antihypertensives, the statins, the beta blockers. I told patients to exercise more, eat better, reduce stress, and I watched them do exactly that. And I still watched some of them die in the morning, not during exertion, not during a stressful afternoon, in the morning. And it wasn't until Case File 2016, a 68-year-old retired school principal from Central Ohio, a man I'll call GR, who had done absolutely everything right by every standard I had ever been trained to apply, that I finally understood what was actually happening inside the bodies of the people I was supposed to be saving. What I'm about to share with you is not on any pamphlet your cardiologist hands you at discharge. It is not in the standard of care guidelines written by committees that have never once sat with a grieving family and tried to explain why a man who took his medication every night, who exercised 4 times a week, who had his blood pressure controlled to textbook perfection, was found unresponsive in his bedroom at 7 in the morning by his wife of 41 years. It is buried in research that gets published in journals like Circulation and the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, and then quietly disappears from every clinical guideline written afterward, because there is no patent on what I'm about to tell you, no profit margin attached to it, no pharmaceutical sales representative pushing it in a lunch meeting with your physician. And every single day that passes without this information is a day your cardiovascular system is navigating the most dangerous 90 minutes of every 24-hour cycle completely unprotected in ways that your morning medication routine was never designed to address, in ways that your doctor has almost certainly never explained to you, because it was never explained to them. GR was not a man who ignored his health. His chart was the kind of chart that makes a physician feel like the system is working. He had been managing hypertension for 11 years. His medications, lisinopril 20 milligrams, amlodipine 5 milligrams, had his blood pressure sitting at 128/76 at every afternoon appointment, which is nearly textbook. His most recent stress test was unremarkable. His cholesterol panel was, by every guideline, acceptable. He walked 40 minutes every morning, starting at 6:30 immediately after waking. He drank 2 large cups of strong black coffee before leaving the house. He had read that cold showers improved circulation, so he had started ending every morning shower with 90 seconds of cold water. He was, by the framework I had been trained to use, a success story. And in January of 2016, at approximately 7:15 in the morning, GR collapsed on the sidewalk 40 meters from his front door and was pronounced dead at the scene despite the efforts of a paramedic unit that arrived in under 6 minutes. His daughter called me 3 days later. She said, "He did everything you people told him to do, every single thing, and it wasn't enough." She was right. And the reason it wasn't enough is that nobody, not me, not his cardiologist, not the guidelines we both followed, had ever told GR that the first 90 minutes after waking represent a physiological storm that his cardiovascular system was completely unprepared to manage, and that every single behavioral choice he made during that window was actively compressing the danger, stacking biological stressors on top of one another in a sequence his arterial walls, his autonomic nervous system, and his blood chemistry simply could not absorb. The primary mechanism responsible for what happened to GR has been documented in peer-reviewed cardiovascular literature since the late 1980s. It involves a convergence of hormonal surges, autonomic nervous system shifts, blood viscosity changes, and vascular reactivity patterns that create what researchers in circadian cardiology now call a temporal vulnerability window. A phrase your doctor almost certainly has never used with you, and may have never encountered in continuing medical education, because the pharmaceutical industry has never figured out how to sell a pill that addresses a window. Drop a 1 in the comments right now if you or someone you love takes blood pressure medication and your doctor has never once discussed what time of day your cardiovascular risk is actually highest. I want to know how many of you are sitting with this gap, because I am going to show you exactly what is happening inside your body during those first 90 minutes of the day. I am going to show you the mechanisms your physician was never trained to explain, and I am going to give you a protocol that addresses each one of them. But I am not going to give you that protocol yet. Before I do, you need to understand what is actually happening inside your vascular system while you are still lying in bed, before your feet touch the floor, because the moment you understand the mechanism, everything about your morning routine is going to look completely different. Here is what your cardiovascular system is actually doing while you sleep, and why the transition out of that state is one of the most mechanically demanding events your body performs every single day. During the hours of sleep, your autonomic nervous system operates under parasympathetic dominance, and I want you to think of this as your body running on a reduced load electrical circuit. The demand on the system is low, heart rate drops, blood pressure drops. The smooth muscle lining of your arterial walls relaxes. Your adrenal glands are producing cortisol at their lowest levels of the entire 24-hour cycle. Your blood, having gone without fluid replenishment for 6 to 8 hours, has been gradually thickening, plasma volume declining, red blood cells moving through increasingly viscous fluid, the whole system slowing toward its biological minimum. Now think about what happens the moment your circadian clock initiates the waking sequence, because this is where the load-bearing wall of your cardiovascular architecture gets hit simultaneously from 4 directions at once. Your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis fires. Cortisol begins surging, and not gradually. Research published in Psychoneuroendocrinology has documented what is called the cortisol awakening response, a spike of 30 to 50% above baseline cortisol levels occurring within the first 15 to 30 minutes of waking. At the same moment, your sympathetic nervous system assumes dominance, releasing norepinephrine and epinephrine into your bloodstream. These catecholamines are the electrical surge in a system that has been running at low voltage all night. Heart rate climbs. Peripheral vascular resistance increases as blood vessels constrict to redirect circulation toward major organs and muscles. Blood pressure rises, often sharply, in what cardiologists call the morning blood pressure surge, and a 2003 study published in Hypertension followed over 5,000 patients and found that those with the steepest morning blood pressure surges had a 71% higher incidence of silent cerebrovascular lesions compared to those with blunted surges. 71%. That is not a marginal statistical footnote. That is the difference between a brain that is intact and one that is silently accumulating damage every single morning, while the owner of that brain believes their blood pressure is controlled because an afternoon clinic reading said so. And layered on top of the hormonal surge and the pressure spike is the blood viscosity problem, because your blood is at its thickest in the morning, platelets are at their most aggregable, and a protein called plasminogen activator inhibitor 1, which suppresses your body's natural clot-dissolving mechanisms, reaches its peak circulating concentration in the early morning hours. Your body's own internal fire suppression system, the mechanism that dissolves small clots before they become catastrophic, is at its weakest exactly when your blood pressure is spiking and your vessels are under maximum mechanical stress. Think of your arterial system like the load-bearing infrastructure of a building that has been sitting in freezing temperatures all night. The materials have contracted, the joints have stiffened, and now someone is throwing the main power switch and demanding full operational capacity before the structure has had any time to warm, to expand, to equilibrate. That is what waking up does to your cardiovascular system. And that is the environment GR was walking into every morning when he laced up his shoes at 6:30. Case file 2019. A 63-year-old retired logistics manager from Western Pennsylvania, I'll call her DM. She came to me 18 months after surviving a transient ischemic attack, a TIA, what most people call a mini stroke, that had occurred at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. Her neurologist had adjusted her blood thinner. Her cardiologist had added a low-dose aspirin. Nobody had asked her what she did in the first 30 minutes after waking. When I asked, she described a routine that was, from the perspective of morning cardiovascular physiology, a near-perfect compression of biological risk. She woke at 6:15. She immediately stood up from bed, quickly, she said, because she did not like lying around. She went directly to the kitchen and drank 2 cups of strong coffee. She then did 30 minutes of moderate exercise on a stationary bike, beginning within 20 minutes of waking. She drank no water until after her workout. She had been doing this routine for 6 years. Her TIA had occurred on a morning no different from any other. When I explained the morning blood pressure surge, the cortisol awakening response, the viscosity elevation, and the PAI-1 peak to her, she sat across from me and said, "No one ever told me any of this." That sentence, I have heard it more times than I can count. And every time I hear it, I think about how many people are running that same routine right now, this morning, completely unaware that they are stacking biological accelerants during the window of maximum cardiovascular vulnerability. Drop a 2 in the comments if you currently exercise within 30 minutes of waking without first hydrating, because what I am about to explain about the second mechanism is going to change how you think about that habit permanently. The second mechanism is one that your doctor almost certainly has never discussed with you, and it involves the intersection of 2 systems that conventional cardiology still largely treats as separate: your autonomic nervous system and your vascular endothelium. The endothelium is the single-cell thick lining of every blood vessel in your body, and I want you to think of it as the electrical wiring embedded in the walls of a building. When that wiring is intact, it regulates current flow, prevents overload, signals when pressure is excessive, and releases compounds that keep the entire structure operating within safe parameters. When the wiring is corroded, when endothelial function is compromised, none of those regulatory signals work correctly anymore. The endothelium does not just passively line your vessels. It produces nitric oxide, a molecule that causes smooth muscle in arterial walls to relax, maintaining vessel diameter and preventing the kind of pressure spike that tears at vulnerable plaques. A 2018 meta-analysis published in the European Heart Journal reviewed 31 studies and found that endothelial dysfunction, measurable, reproducible, clinically significant endothelial dysfunction, was present in patients an average of 7 years before their first cardiovascular event. 7 years of corroded wiring before the building catches fire. And here is the specific problem with the morning window. Nitric oxide bioavailability is at its lowest in the early morning hours, which is precisely when sympathetic nervous system activation is at its peak and blood pressure is surging. The very molecule your vessel walls need to buffer that pressure surge is least available during the moment it is most needed. This is not a coincidence. This is a biological design that evolved when waking meant gradual, gentle movement in cool morning air, not standing abruptly, consuming high-dose caffeine on an empty stomach, and immediately beginning intense cardiovascular exercise. Caffeine, specifically, inhibits adenosine receptors and amplifies sympathetic nervous system output at a moment when that system is already in a state of surging activation. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that caffeine consumed within the first hour of waking, particularly in individuals with slow caffeine metabolism, which is genetically determined and affects approximately 50% of adults over 50, produced significantly larger blood pressure responses than the same caffeine consumed 3 hours after waking. The vessel walls are already under load. Caffeine is tightening every bolt in a structure that is already at tensile maximum. And then there is cold exposure, cold water, cold air, cold showers, All of them trigger a reflex called cold-induced vasoconstriction, mediated through the sympathetic nervous system, which causes rapid constriction of peripheral vessels and a measurable spike in systolic blood pressure. A study in the journal Clinical Cardiology documented systolic pressure increases of 20 to 30 millimeters of mercury during acute cold exposure in older adults, in some cases more. In a person with undiagnosed arterial plaque, with morning blood viscosity at its peak, with nitric oxide bioavailability depleted, with the cortisol awakening response already driving pressure upward, that additional 20 to 30 millimeter spike is not a wellness intervention. It is a compression test on infrastructure that has not been inspected in years. Case file 2021. A 71-year-old former engineer from the Pacific Northwest, I'll call him RT. He had no diagnosed cardiovascular disease, normal cholesterol, no hypertension. He had read extensively about cold exposure therapy and had been doing cold showers every morning for 8 months, beginning the cold exposure within 10 minutes of waking. He was found unresponsive in his bathroom by his wife on a February morning. The autopsy revealed a previously undetected coronary plaque that had ruptured. His widow sent me a message through a patient advocacy organization 6 months later. She said he had been convinced he was doing everything right. He was, by the information available to him. The information that wasn't available to him is what I'm telling you right now. Put a 3 in the comments if someone sent you this video, because that person may have just done something more important for your health than any physician appointment you have scheduled this year. I am going to give you the complete protocol in a moment, the exact sequence, the exact timing, the specific interventions that address each of the 3 mechanisms I have now identified for you. But before I do, I need you to understand one final piece, because without it, the protocol addresses only 2/3 of the problem, and 2/3 is not enough when the window we are talking about is 90 minutes that repeat every single morning for the rest of your life.